Welcome friends, we are into 20th module of AI and we'll be discussing about some prerequisites for the MiniMax algorithm to be applied, and a few other algorithms also. The prerequisites are just fine. So we are going to discuss about how we can browse through the graph, the search tree that is generated for any game, how we proceed and how we find a move which is the best move for us. MiniMax algorithm is one of the oldest algorithms of game playing. Why it is called MiniMax? Because it works with the search tree where you have alternate layers of min and max layers. We have already seen the min layers are where the opponent is playing and max layer is where we are playing. Okay, so that is what we are going to look at. Remember the heuristic value, the static evaluation function value, and maximizing layer will pick up a node with maximum value, and the minimum layer will pick up that by minimum value. Why that static evaluation function is needed and all that also will be looking at in this particular module. Remember, we have looked at tic-tac-toe problem last module, and we have labeled some of these states at W, L, and then we have also had draw. Okay, W is win, L is loss, and D is draw. So that was all three possible cases in tic-tac-toe, which is also the same in chess. SEF is a static evaluation function, is many at times is not a single entity, is basically a cumulative value which is made up of multiple components, and will be. That is also something that we will be looking at. We will begin with three types of situation which is the outcome of tic-tac-toe. One is winning, the other one is losing, and the third one is a draw. So all three of them are shown on the screen, and as all three possible outcomes that we have. Based on this, we can draw a search graph or tree like shown in the next slide. Now you probably see this graph and wonder what is N, because I just said win, lose and draw, and why N? N is something which is normal. At this point of time, we have not assigned any status to it, whether it is win, leading to loss, or leading to draw. How we are doing it? In fact, the process is like this. We'll expand the search tree as much as we can. When we come to our time gets over, or we'll have to play the next move, we stop. We'll not explore complete game trees in most cases. We almost always explore game trees partially, because in most cases it is impossible to do one. Second, we'll only be taking one move. Now please understand, the search tree is explored with every move that we take. So when we take a move, we come to next level, and again the opponent plays, and we get a situation. Now we again run that thing, find out the complete search tree, and then decide the next move. Okay, so every time we'll do this process. So that is very expensive. So if you do it for a very large time, you probably run out of time. So time is always the biggest constraint, exactly like chess. So here also we are doing it. We stop when there is a sixth ply explored. Okay, and you can see that they are also named as max. The top one is max, that is we are playing. Then mean, then max, then mean, then max, and so on. So that these alternate plies are named as mean and max, and we have already discussed why. When we reach to the sixth ply, our time gets over, so we stop. That's the first step. In the second step, we'll evaluate those states. Okay, you can see that the states evaluator, the next slide talks about that thing, and we'll label it in either of the three cases, win, lose and draw, and you can see that they are already done. Once that is done, okay, once we get those values, static evaluation function. Now try to understand how we learn about win, lose or draw. We'll look at the tic-tac-toe position and decide whether it is win, loss or draw. Okay, so if it is winning for us, losing for us, or draw. We have already seen those three cases. Based on that, we pass the value up. Now it is very interesting how the values is passed in this case, because this is a minimizing level. The last level, the sixth level, is minimizing level. Who is playing it? The opponent. So in the leftmost case, we have two outputs, L, one is N, the other is N. N is not possible to determine, we will have to go further. NL. Who will choose it? The opponent. So what is the outcome? L. Okay. The next one is N and D. So who will choose it? Again opponent. Opponent would like to go further, because draw is not all that important for it. It will go further and try to get L. So same way. D and N is the next combo, and N is what it chooses. L and N again, he chooses L, and N and D again, he chooses N, N and L, N and N, and N and D. And there is no win yet. If one of them is win, what will that person do? That person will not back it up, okay? Because he is an opponent. And you can see that there are some winning already, okay? That's the previous level. So if we back it one more level up, what will happen? Now there are two alternatives. Remember, I'm not looking at the lowermost level now, the last but one level, where which level it is max. So the player is playing, the opponent is not playing, so we'll choose the best. So there are two options, W and L, so I'll choose W and not L. N and D, then you choose N, not D. W and N, you'll choose W, and so on and so forth. So you can look at that and decide. Now this thing which we have looked at is very, very important. At minimizing layer, we have two options possible, winning and losing. It is the opponent who is going to choose and we get the loss. At the maximizing layer, we have the same choice, we'll choose win. Okay, so because we are going to play. So that's why the conventional search algorithms won't work here, because conventional search algorithm will always pick up the best heuristic value, which is not going to work here. If we pass the complete value up, and the graph is shown in the next slide, you can see that there is not much of a difference. All four moves that I have, all four moves says that it is N. So I don't have much to choose from. But if you look at in little more detail, if you say that if you play the first move, the leftmost move, okay, we have one chance to win, but that is a minimizing move, okay. It is going to be played by the opponent, so we won't have that chance. But the second one, we have a chance to win, okay, if the opponent makes mistakes. So the second one is little better, and it is not going to lead us to lose. If you see that thing, the second move, there is no chance that we'll get a lose. Okay, we are not going to lose our game there. So it is little better than the rest of them. Now you can see that if I only label like winning, losing, this draw, is not going to help me much. I would better evaluate this position of the state in little more detail, a little more elaborated fashion. In that case, I'll be able to figure out exactly which move is better and which move is not. So if I do that, I'll to step away from only labeling. I'll have to give some value, and that value, when we give that value, we call it static evaluation function, which is quite similar to heuristic function. But then why we use word static evaluation function? Because it applies to a state and then results into a value. And usually, unlike heuristic function, this static evaluation function usually is between range. Minus 10 to 10 is what we have already used. In some other cases, people use minus 1 to 1, where any real value between minus 1 to 1 is acceptable. In our case, minus 10 to 10, usually integer values are acceptable, other values are not acceptable. But some authors even use real values as well. And remember, we have chosen 6 plies in our example based on many things. The time is 1, the branching factor of the tree is 1 more. For example, in a case of chess, branching factor is huge, 35. So exploring next ply will require almost 35 times more than the current ply. So it's a huge amount of time that is required. But remember, if this exploration, one of the parameter of exploration is the criticality of the game. If our king is under attack, obviously we'll need to probe little further. And we have already seen the backing up. Okay, we begin with the leaf nodes, then start backing values up. Why we do that? Because at leaf node we have the most, this heuristic function or static evaluation functions are what? I can apply that thing at level 1. But then at level 1 I don't get much information. The heuristic or static evaluation function are just estimates, and I go near to the goal, I get better estimate. So the process is to go to the goal state as near to goal state as possible, and once we reach to the nearest possible case, we apply static evaluation function, see what it offers, and based on that we find out what the parent offer, and parent to parent and all that, and using that we'll have a far better estimates of the next move that we are going to take. Please let me repeat, the entire search tree is constructed just to decide the next step. So because I don't have complete information, every time opponent plays, I'll generate a an entire subtree as much as big subtree as I can and just pick up the next move every time. So this is what it does. And in this case the exploration seems fruitless because eventually I get all 4 of my children having value n. Looks quite similar. But in true sense they are not, we have already seen. So what we need is a static evaluation function. And for tic-tac-toe, let us look at some of the characteristics. One characteristic is highest value of win and least value of losing. What does that mean? 10 indicates winning, minus 10 indicate losing. What does that mean? If I have 3 consecutive cells occupied, state is 10. If all 3 consecutive states, all 3 consecutive cells are occupied by opponent, it is minus 10. And then there are others also. For example, if I have 2 consecutive cells occupied and the third one is empty, it's a very good thing. I can just play the next move there and I'll win. So it's also a very good state. So that should have a higher heuristic value. If an opponent has 2 consecutive cells occupied and the third cell is empty, it's a very less value, almost defeat. Okay. Similarly, if you have 1 cell occupied and next 2 are empty, is a good state to have compared to a cell where the other cells are occupied. So that heuristic value of 1 cell where we have the value and other 2 are empty is better, has higher heuristic value than a cell where we occupy that thing and 2 others are occupied by opponent. And there are similar cases. So you just provide and basically the heuristic is based on a simple method. First, we would like to win as long as possible. Second, we would like to avoid defeat. If I don't get to a state which help me win, I'll try to pick up a state where I can avoid defeat. Okay, if the opponent has occupied 2 consecutive cells, the third one is empty, is very less heuristic value, will never go for that. That is what we would like to prevent the opponent to win. Okay, so that is the second thing, and if nothing else is possible, we will opt for a draw. Okay, so this is the strategy, and based on that, we'll define heuristics. And based on this heuristics, this static evaluation function characteristics, will decide the value of a state. And you can see there are multiple components, and even with such a simple case, there are more than 5, 6 components for the heuristic value. 3 cases are shown on the screen. Okay, can you try to understand what they are? In case number 1, there I can play, and you can see the bold face X is R movement. If I place, in case of A, it is little better because B is not very good because the third space is already occupied, and playing elsewhere is not also very good. But okay, but the case number 1 is A is good, B is not very good. C is comparatively better than B because B, when we are playing B, we don't have any, like one part is already full, the other part is not. Okay, the case number 2 and 3 also indicates the player's movement. Okay, in case number 2, if we in A, 2A, the playing X will be useless. You're doing nothing. You won't achieve anything out of it. But playing in the corner, which is shown in B, we have 2 possible options. You can have the top row or the last column. Okay, so that is little better compared to the other one. C is as good as A because only one option, the topmost row, is possible for us to fill. So out of that, B is a better move. So it will have higher heuristic value based on this information. Okay. Same is the case with 3. A, when you place X at the left top, is not very good because I am not going to achieve anything on that column. It is possible to have on the right, the topmost row, but it is not. Placing it there on the in B, it is good because I can have 2 possible options: the last column and the diagonal line. The case number 3, it's also good. I'm having 2 consecutive X's in line. So the next move I can win. So this actually, the third move, you can see that C is better than B and B is better than A. So based on such information, we can provide heuristic value. These are just examples of showing state with more heuristic value and less. In fact, if you have played tic-tac-toe yourself, the best move is to occupy the center in the beginning. Why? Because you have degree of freedom. You can move in all directions. There are, in fact, it's there in the center, diagonal lines, 2 diagonal lines, 2 horizontal and vertical line, the middle column, the middle row, and both diagonal lines are possible for you to cover in this case. So that is very good actually. So that's the best place to move. And The disadvantage of the second player, we have already seen in the previous module, that the last slide of the previous module talked about the second player will not have some chances. If the first player has played something, the second player will not be in a position to use that. So, that is the advantage of the first player. How static evaluation function gets its value? We have seen 6 different options possible for a tic-tac-toe case, and you will have to evaluate those cases to figure out exactly what is static evaluation function's value. In case of chess or in case of other games, you have many components, and usually every component has some weight associated with it. For example, in chess, there is something called a threat of fork, which we are going to see later, or center control, or degree of freedom. Okay, how free your piece is to move around. So, there are many factors. There are many factors which determines whether this one very low factor is called piece advantage, number of pieces that I have compared to number of pieces the opponent has. If after a move I have the piece advantage, I have more number of pieces than the opponent has, I have a piece advantage. If I have my piece can move to a center where I have better control, I have an advantage. If I can make sure that my knight is in a place which threat of fork to the opponent can capture an important piece of the opponent like queen, I have an advantage. So, such things, such moves, such states are better compared to others. So, everything that is important is actually listed. The weights of each of these important things, how important threat of fork is, how important center control is, based on which some quantification is made and you get those values. Now, the question is, who decides this? This is decided by experts, and please understand, this is not a measure of anything else but experts' intuition and judgment. If you are a chess master, you decide what is going to be the importance of threat of fork, how important is the central control, and how important it is to occupy a specific position in chess, and so on and so forth. How important is a combination of knight and rook and something like that. A lot of people play a lot of different ways, so you will have to figure out which position is better over the other and give marks accordingly, so the value accordingly. So, once you do that, what you have done is you have identified components and given those values. One thing you probably think that more number of components, more precise your measurement and better it is. It is not so. The reason is that if you do it that way, remember, with every move I will have to explore the search tree and I have to apply static evaluation function to all leave nodes. If I explore it just one level in chess, I will have to apply to 35 states. If I apply to 2, 35 to 35 states. Think of it, if I have n, it is 35 raised to n number of nodes I will have to apply, evaluate them for that particular case, for a single move every time. Now, that is going to be troublesome. Take huge amount of time if I use lot of components. That demands SEF to be optimal. So, we will not choose components which does not have much of an effect. We will only choose significant components, and that is why probably Deep Thought team had somebody who was a grandmaster, chess grandmaster was part of it, and it had around 8,000 components in the static evaluation function of that Deep Thought computer, which could beat Garry Kasparov, had 8,000 components. 8,000 is not all that large if you look at the complexity of chess. And how it is done? It is basically a weighted average. Component, its weight, component, its weight, component, its weights. Let me repeat that both the components as well as the associated weight is expert's decision, and it is quite possible that one expert gives a different list, the other expert gives a different list. One expert gives 10% weightage to a component, some other will give 20% of this thing. So, it is again varying. There are two different types of components, but if you look at the types of components, basically there are two. One is row value of that piece. For example, in case of chess, queen has much higher value than a pawn. Not only that, king will have a value which is more than the total of all the values of all other nodes, all other pieces. Obviously, what we want to do is to save the king, leave everything else be sacrificed for it. And how can we state so? We can state that by saying the king's value is highest. Not only highest, it is more than the collective value of everybody else. So, that is how we have to do it. So, that the first component is called row component for static evaluation function, which acts this way. Second is positional. Now, that adds dynamism to this calculation of SEF. it is possible that sometimes even a pawn has more value than a queen. Sometimes, okay. And there is one situation which we are going to talk about. It's called positional value. So sometimes normally pawn have say 10 points, but in a typical situation it might have 1000. So you can sacrifice your queen to kill that pawn in some cases. So that is important. Look at the next slide. That slide talks about the power of that white pawn. You have two white pawns here, but the lowermost pawn, you can see that the importance of it is the opponent king is under attack, and it has few places to go, but almost all places are occupied. It can come down, but the problem is that if it comes down, there is a threat from the rook, so it cannot come down directly. It has only two options left and right, and my pawn, if I place the pawn in the position that is shown, that pawn's position at that point of time is more than a queen's position, because that will help me check the king and the game will be over. So for placing, suppose if my queen is under attack somewhere and I have two possible moves, I can save my queen, one, I can place this pawn one step further at this position. Which one should I choose? I choose this. I can sacrifice queen for this pawn because this pawn is more important for me right now. Once I do that, I am done. Okay, I can tell that the king is under attack and king has no place to move. The job is done, the game is over. So that's the example of positional point. So static evaluation function in chess is based on two different components. The row, obviously, based on the original value, original capability of that piece to move around and capture other pieces, and the positional. In certain cases like this, value of pawn may be more than a queen. Number of components, as I said, large number of components is not very good. More components means more time, and deep blue in conventional cases could explore 6-7 plies and sometimes 15 to 20 plies, and in that case think of a number of nodes that you will have to apply the static evaluation function to. So heuristic function should have two important characteristics: should closely match the real value and should be as fast as it can be. So some information about deep blue is provided. As I said, 8000 components were there in that thing, and it was very, very powerful. It was 259th fastest computer, and it has 11.38 Gbps speed, which was considered to be phenomenal in those days. But then there are some issues with using this as SEF. Not all experts agree on either components, neither the weights. So you'll have to get some concession on it if you have a team of experts. And one more thing, deep blue was an easier operation because it was gray specific. It was designed to make sure that gray's the moves can be thwarted. If you want to write a general purpose chess player, it would be very difficult, because here these strategies and heuristic functions are specifically designed to address this guy Garry Kasparov. Here it is, if you write general, it is going to be very hard. Let me tell you, it is quite possible that if a player is playing against deep blue and play a very stupid move, the deep blue will get confused that what is happening. They can't think of it. But it cannot understand, because it has the ability to understand Garry Kasparov's moves, but it cannot understand this move. That's the problem. So if you want to write a general purpose problem solver for chess, is very, very hard. It's almost impossible. In fact, IBM people took 3 to 4 years to build this, and they spent a lot of money on it. Rather than, though it has beaten Garry Kasparov, I must say that is actually a testimony to that genius for which they have done so much hard work to beat him only 3-2. General purpose would be almost impossible, because it has to be generic, it has to have more number of components, and should have capability to decide what the opponent is thinking. It has to model the thinking model of the opponent and then match with it, and that's going to be very, very hard. The other point which I talked about, threat of fork, which is shown in the next slide, you can see that. Now this also is very important component for generating a component for SEF, and if you know that the opponent is fond of doing it, make sure that you keep a component there in your static evaluation function, which avoids steps where the opponent can get to something like this. You can see that in this case, we'll have to move our king and sacrifice our queen. We have no option. Okay, even if some pieces are there in between, knight, those does not create obstacle for a knight, so it can always do it. The one more important point, one more important component of SEF is called degree of freedom. You can see that there is a threat from knight to the king. Unfortunately, I cannot use my queen to capture the knight because my own piece is sitting in between. Now, such a move is not very good. So, this is called degree of freedom. I don't have the degree of freedom I should. King is under attack, but queen cannot help. With that, we'll come to an end of this particular module. In this module, what we have done, we have looked at some of the prerequisites. We have looked at labeling as W, L and draw is not going to help us much. We need little more precise information, for which we use SCF, static evolution functions. And static evolution functions are applied on a state and gives us the merit of that state based on some range that we provide. In our case, we pick up a range from -10 to 10. -10 is losing, +10 is winning, but then some other value indicates how promising that node is. Okay. So, static evolution function is a very good, very important thing, fundamental thing for game playing. And static evolution function is not the one thing. There are multiple components involved in it. Most of the commercial programs use many static evolution evolution function components. Like diff thought had 8,000 odd components. You shouldn't have very large number of components because it's going to reduce the search time. So, that always you need to have some optimum number of such components. And we have looked at some of the components like positional importance of the node we have seen, because that is to be considered in SEF. We have also seen threat of fork and degree of freedom as additional two components for SEF. With that, we will conclude. Thank you.